Today, we're going to strip away all the romance of tall ships and treasure maps. Instead, we're doing a cold, hard corporate autopsy on one of the most powerful and, frankly, ruthless companies in history, the Dutch East India Company, also known as the VOC. Yeah, this isn't a story of glorious exploration. Think of it as a case study in corporate power, taken to the absolute extreme.
So, let me ask you a question. When you think of a globe-spanning, market-dominating Mega-Corp, what comes to mind? You're probably thinking of some tech giant, right? But what if I told you the original blueprint, the real OG, was drafted 400 years ago?
That's right. The world's first true multinational wasn't born in a Silicon Valley garage. It was chartered in Amsterdam, way back in 1602. And it did something truly radical. It fused the relentless pursuit of profit with the state-sanctioned power to wage war. This is a story of a company that basically acted like its own country.
Now, to really get the VOC, you first have to understand the massive business problem it was designed to solve. This whole thing didn't start with a desire for discovery. No, it started as a way to manage insane risk and maximize the return on a very specific and very, very lucrative product.
You see, the spice trade was basically the oil trade of its day. The potential profits were just astronomical. But the risks? They were off the charts. We're talking pirates, shipwrecks, disease, on top of the insane upfront cost of building and outfitting the ships. And to make it all worse, you had a bunch of small Dutch companies all competing with each other. It created this totally disastrous feedback loop. They'd get to Asia and outbid each other, driving the purchase price up, then they'd sail back to Europe and flood the market, which drove their selling price down. It was a race to the bottom, a completely unsustainable way to do business.
So the Dutch government looked at this mess and came up with a pretty radical solution. Their thinking was, why try to regulate this chaotic market? Why not just unleash a single, massive, consolidated company to completely dominate it? And so, in 1602, 6 of these rival companies were forcibly merged into one, the United East India Company.
And here's where it gets really wild. To make sure this new venture would succeed, the Dutch government gave it something a private company had never had before: quasi-sovereign powers. What does that mean? It means the VOC wasn't just a trading firm anymore. For all intents and purposes, when it was operating in Asia, it was the Dutch state.
Just take a look at the powers on this list. It's absolutely nuts. The charter gave the VOC a total monopoly on all Dutch trade in Asia, but it also gave them the right to build their own forts, to raise their own private army and navy, to negotiate treaties like they were a country, and even to wage war. This wasn't a license to trade, it was a license to build an empire.
Okay, but a corporate war machine is seriously expensive. You've got forts, ships, soldiers. That costs a ton of money. So to fund this massive, high-stakes venture, the VOC had to get creative. They basically had to invent key pieces of the modern economy that we still use today. So what they did was structure the VOC as the world's first modern joint stock company. Instead of having just a few wealthy partners fund a single, risky voyage, the company sold shares, tiny little pieces of ownership, to the general public. This spread that immense financial risk across thousands and thousands of different investors.
And you know what? People bought in. The company's initial public offering, the first IPO in history, raised a staggering 6.4 million guilders from over 1,000 different people. This was crowdfunding on a national scale, all designed to finance a global corporate takeover.
This slide really breaks down how revolutionary this was. First, pool the capital. Merge the companies. Second, issue shares to the public. But number 3 is the real game changer. After 1623, they made the capital permanent. Your money was locked in. If you wanted out, the VOC wouldn't give you a refund. You had to do step 4, find someone else to buy your share from you. And this led to the creation of the world's first modern stock exchange in Amsterdam. It created a permanent pool of cash for the company and a liquid market for its shares. Absolutely brilliant.
So now the VOC has the power of a state and the capital of a nation. What do they do with it? Well, let's zoom in on one specific case study that really shows you the company's core operating philosophy in brutal, chilling detail.
The target was a small group of islands in what's now Indonesia. They're called the Banda Islands, and at the time, they were the only place on planet Earth where you could find nutmeg and mace. For the VOC, the objective was simple and ruthless. Control these islands, and you control the entire global supply. A perfect monopoly.
Now, this didn't happen overnight.
You can see on the timeline how things escalated. It started with attempts at peaceful trade, but pretty soon the VOC started using threats and coercion to get a foothold. Then they just seized land to build a fort, completely against the will of the Bandanese people. Naturally, this led to resistance, which the VOC then turned around and used as the excuse they needed to declare all-out war.
And if you want to know the company's real mission statement, you just have to read this quote from its Governor-General Jan Pieterszoon Coen. "We cannot carry on trade without war, nor war without trade." I mean, it doesn't get much clearer or colder than that, does it? For the VOC, business and violence weren't just related. They were the exact same thing.
In 1621, Coen made good on that philosophy. He arrived with a fleet and an army, and his forces systematically depopulated the Banda Islands. This number says it all. Over 90% of the Bandanese population was either killed, enslaved, or forced to flee for their lives. It was a corporate strategy executed as a genocide.
So how in the world did they justify this? Well, scholars have a name for this process: civilized dispossession. Here's how it worked. The company would force the Bandanese to sign these exclusive trade treaties. When the locals inevitably resisted the impossible terms, the VOC would declare them in violation of contract. This created a legal-sounding pretext, a paper trail, to legitimize what was really just violent conquest for profit.
So, the conquest of Banda worked. It secured the nutmeg monopoly and made shareholders an obscene amount of money. But the VOC's real impact goes way beyond that. What it really did was create a powerful and terrifyingly effective blueprint for a new kind of global corporation.
And if you ever doubt the sheer scale we're talking about, just look at this chart. At its peak, the VOC's value, when adjusted for inflation, was an estimated $7.9 trillion. That's more than several of today's biggest tech giants combined. By this measure, it was the most valuable corporation in human history. It's not even close.
You know, its legacy is just woven into the DNA of our modern world. It was the first publicly traded company, the first true multinational. It pioneered concepts like corporate governance. But most importantly, it created the model for fusing private capital with the power of a nation-state. Now, it did eventually dissolve in 1799, collapsing under the weight of its own corruption. But the blueprint it created, that lived on.
And that leaves us with one final thought. The company itself, the VOC, is a historical artifact. It's gone. But the questions it raises? Questions about the fusion of corporate ambition, financial innovation, and state power? Those are more relevant today than ever before. So you have to ask yourself, the Dutch East India Company may be gone, but is its ruthless, profit-driven model truly a thing of the past?